Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, it's Evelyn from the Camera Store coming to you live this morning. We're diving into travel and story photography with Erica Robinson, and this is sponsored by Tamron. This is a hybrid event, so we have both an in-person audience today as well as an online audience, and we welcome everyone from joining from wherever you are. And of course, with our live stream events, we do encourage everyone to comment and ask questions throughout the live stream. And we also wanted to let you know that Tamron is throwing in a special offer today. So if you're registered, you will receive an email with that offer. But if you want to be added to the list, you can email me, evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I'll hook you up with that offer. But the best part of going live is being able to interact with all of you. So we will have a Q&A at the end, which we'll monitor and ask Erica lots of really great questions. But this is a live event, so of course anything can happen. We have our TCS TV live dream team working behind the scenes. Today we have Jeff and Graham. And we're happy to have our guest in house. So Erica Robinson is a multi-genre photographer with a passion for both travel and photography. So we had her here in the spring. We had awesome feedback about it. So we wanted to bring her back for this topic. So she is coming here from San Diego, California, and we welcome Erica. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Good. Big crowd today. Awesome. Well, yes, thank you so much for the intro. My name is Erica Robinson. I am a national tech rep with Tamron Americas. I've been with Tamron for 8 years-ish now. I absolutely love what I do. I get to travel and meet new people and teach and learn new photo things all the time, so I absolutely love being here. This is actually one of my favorite stores. Don't tell anybody else that, but it's one of my favorite stores. And I get to hang out with Ted over there. Ted's gonna have all our gear out this afternoon, so if you have gear questions, he's our guy. Yeah, so I, again, have been with Tamron for about 8 years. Before that, I've been in the photo industry for forever, really, since as long as I can remember. I worked for a cruise line out of college, doing that for a year, and that was a wild time in life. I was a photographer on ships, and I got to do everything from portraits to onshore boarding and offshore boarding and excursions, and that really kind of lit the fire to knowing that not only did I want to do photography, but I wanted to travel and do it. I wanted to see the world and bring it to other people. So a little bit about me, but yes, I'm coming from San Diego, California, where it's slightly warmer, not gonna lie. A little cold up here, but Ted warned me. He called me like months before this event was gonna happen. He's like, "Are you sure? It's gonna be cold. Bring a parka." I was like, "Great." So I have my parka and my hat and my gloves. I'm ready to go. So I'm prepared with all of my cold weather things. But I missed the week that was like -40, right? So that's great timing. Glad to not be in that. Anyway, so today we are gonna talk about travel photography and storytelling. If you do have questions, please feel free to raise the hand, toss out the question, whatever it is. I am more than happy to interact. Anybody online, same thing, type in those questions. I'm happy to interact. This first section, I'm actually gonna ask you guys a bunch of questions, so I want to hear from you. This first section, I really like to go through and talk about photographers that inspire us, because photography, especially travel photography, we run into a little bit of everything. We meet all different genres of photography. We aren't just one specific facet. We handle portraits and landscape and wildlife and night photography. That's kind of all encompassing under the travel photography field, right? So I like to talk about different photographers that inspire us in those realms, because more often than not, there's someone that you guys are going to tell me that I've never heard of, and vice versa, because that's what makes the world go around, right? We get to meet other people and be inspired by these other photographers. This is a community event, so are there any, landscape photographers out there, are there any landscape photographers that you can think of that inspire you? Yes.
Yeah,
I saw a hand.
Wickett was who started our Darwin Wickett.
Darwin Wickett, okay, all right. Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Usually the first person I hear is Ansel Adams, so this might have been the first class that has not said that. So let's start, yeah. Yes, Peter Lick, definitely. I saw one of his exhibits in Hawaii when I lived out there for a while. It's beautiful, yeah. Yes?
Dave Grocia.
Yeah, definitely. I just finished his book. It's great. The polar bear story was my favorite, where he has to climb up a pole and run from polar bears. Great story. Yeah. Paul Zika, definitely, thank you. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else?
Michael or Andrew Freeman?
I don't know. Michael Freeman, Andrew Freeman, anybody? I don't recognize it, but I can look it up for sure. I'm gonna have to have Ted write down all these names so that I remember, because I'm definitely gonna forget. But cool, all right. Wildlife photographers. Are there any wildlife photographers out there that inspire you?
John Maria.
John Maria, okay, all right. Anybody else? Christy Odom is one of my favorites. She's a great friend of mine, an incredible photographer. She just did a story on beluga whales that was epic. Amy Vitale. What's that? Sendash, what was the last name? Cardur. Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up. I don't know the name. Okay. Okay, awesome, thank you. All right. So what was it again, sorry?
Annie Griffith.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Annie Griffiths, yes, thank you. All right, macro photographers. Are there any macro photographers out there that you can think of? What is it? Don Com? Okay. I love bringing up the macro slide because I personally will fully admit that I'm not much of a macro photographer. I love macro photography. I think it's brilliant. I just never personally connected with it much. And since we have a team of about 9, or used to have a team of about 9, one of my coworkers is a brilliant macro photographer. And her and I could be standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon at this beautiful vista, and she would be like down on the floor with a rock, playing with this little tiny rock. And I loved it. That's the best part, was that I got to explore with her, and she always taught me to kind of slow down and see that anything in this little section that I'm at, there's still so much to photograph in such a tiny space. So Mike Motes is one of our ambassadors. He's a great macro photographer. Does these little macro landscapes that are really kind of eye-opening for sure. People, when we are out in the world, environmental portraits, is there anybody that you can think of that inspires you in this realm? Yes. Sean Tucker. Okay, awesome. Raphael Giersak. Okay, awesome. Anybody else? Deanne Fitzmaurice.
Wayne Simpson.
Lindsay Adario. Wayne Simpson. Okay.
Vivian Meyer.
Yes, Vivian Mayer. Absolutely. Yeah. Jonathan Thorpe. Jonathan Thorpe is one of our image masters, and he is a brilliant photographer. He has a very unique way of lighting his portraits, and whether we choose to light from the front to the back of our portrait or the back to the front of our portrait, he's a very unique way of styling that image. I actually got to sit with him for a photo shoot last year, and it was so much fun. He's a great guy and a brilliant photographer, so if you haven't looked him up, I'd look him up as well. All right, well, thank you for all the names. I hope somebody picked a name up that they had not heard before. The next section, I want to dive into a little bit of research, because travel photography and storytelling kind of leads hand in hand with how we approach our subject, whether that's a person, place, or thing. How we approach it is half the battle, right? And I personally think that research is incredibly important to how we carry out what we are going to be photographing. So when I go out for a shoot, I start thinking about all of the questions that I ask myself, the where, what, when, how, and why, right? Where am I photographing? Why am I photographing that space? That helps me figure out how I'm going to do it. So I kind of started out with a list out here so that you guys could see the questions that I ask myself when I go through, when I have a shoot in front of me and lined up what I want to do for that shoot. So I start with thinking about where my lodging is. If I have a photo shoot in Joshua Tree National Park, that's great. Joshua Tree National Park is 2 hours exactly from my house, but that's to the entrance of Joshua Tree National Park, not to the 45 minutes in that it takes to get to X marks the spot where I want to be photographing, right? So I have to think about the logistics behind the how I'm doing this. Where do I need to be, and how long it's going to take me to get from not just A to B, but B to C, C to D, all of those different locations, right? That also lends hand in hand with, yeah, go for it.
The Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, in the Rocky Mountains, yep, for sure. Have you been?
Yeah.
Yeah? Awesome. I'm jealous. I've only been like twice. Same thing, yeah. If I'm going out to the Rockies, I want to make sure that where I'm going is, I've timed out where that space is to make sure that I'm not missing sunset. If I have a sunset photo shoot that night, if I get there 5 minutes too late, I've missed the sunset, right? Yeah, Don't want to do that. So I want to make sure that I've timed it out properly to get from A to B to C to D in all of those spaces. The research is really important for these things. I also am a full-out nerd when it comes to maps. I want to make sure that I have my paper map with me at all times, that I have marked where I'm going, that I know, again, how long it's going to take to get from A to B, and that I can get out to different access roads if I need to get out at a certain time, right? So I'm really studying those maps to make sure I'm getting from where I'm going to where I've come from. I also wanted to put a list up here of some apps that I found really helpful. This is certainly not an all-encompassing list of apps, but these are some that I've found helpful over the last few years, both for photography and just being out traveling, being out in the wilderness, being out camping. Apps like The Dirt and Gaia and iOverlander and First Aid are really important if I'm out there camping and backpacking to make sure that I can stay safe when I'm out there traveling. If I am in certain areas, I want to make sure that I'm watching WeatherBug and the Fires app. Again, I live in Southern California, so I'm really kind of tracking where those fires are at all times to make sure that I am safely out there shooting. And if you're a night sky shooter, I use SkyGuide and PhotoPills a lot. Somebody recently told me about StarWalk 2. So SkyGuide is more particular for iPhone and Apple product, and StarWalk 2 is kind of the same thing, but for Android users. PhotoPills, how many people in here have used PhotoPills? Yes? Okay, a little bit reluctantly, solid answer. It is, yes. It is a brilliant, brilliant app. For those of you who haven't used it, it's a wonderful app. It's maybe about $10 or $12 at this point. It's not super pricey, but it is a very in-depth app. It has a lot of tools. So I highly suggest that if you do plan on using it, try it out in-house prior to getting out in the field. Learn from our mistakes now, my mistake of showing up in the field, trying to use it and figure out where the Milky Way is going to be and when, and how to track my nodal point and figure out all these things. Don't try and do that in the field with the app. It is wonderful, but use it prior to getting out there. I can't hear much back there. Okay, cool. I can just hear a ton of voices, and so I'm trying to stay on track, but all I can hear is the voices. Cool, thanks guys. Okay, so this is more kind of particular to the United States, but permitting and such, when we are out there traveling and photographing in specific places, we want to make sure that we have the proper permits. We want to make sure that we are operating ethically in that space, right? That we have the proper permits to be where we are going. So this is just a solid reminder. I'm not going to tell you what permits to get, but this is just a reminder to kind of look into those when you are going to certain places like national parks or whatnot. Equipment efficiency. So part of this research is knowing our equipment. There's not one perfect kit for everybody. Right? What lenses work for me, what camera bodies work for me, don't work for other people, and vice versa. I have been pretty particular about my kit lately. I recently rearranged everything and decided I don't want to carry around a 40-pound pack anymore. I want to lighten this load. And so I get pretty particular for certain workshops and certain events where I'm only maybe taking one lens and one camera body. But I need to know my equipment. The more I know my equipment, the better that shoot's going to go. And I mean that even down to literally the clothes that I'm wearing, right? I want to know that if I'm out doing a night sky shoot, that in my pocket, I have my, my remote trigger. In my other pocket, I know that I have the filters that I need. Like I have everything kind of on me so that I don't have to go digging through my backpack. Because if I go digging through my backpack, one, I can lose something at night. Two, I can have a little scorpion crawl in there and come home with me that I don't want to come home with me. So I am making sure that I am kind of efficient in the way that I'm working. Does that work all the time? No. There's going to always be something that kind of throws me off. But be kind of flexible with that and fluid with that. Just knowing your equipment is really helpful. We're going to go into kind of a few of those accessories that might help us in our travel photography adventures. But first, I want to talk about a couple of lenses that I personally really like. Again, these might work for others, might not work for some. We're gonna see what works for everybody. I, for a very, very long time, shot strictly primes. And I absolutely love using primes because for me, it really sets my boundaries. It really gives me one specific focal length, and I'm the one that has to do the moving. I have to get in and out of my subject. I have to fit exactly in those borders what I want in those borders. But it doesn't work for every photo shoot that I'm on, depending, right? So for primes, just for an example, the 35 1.4 for our Canon and Nikon DSLR kit is probably one of my favorite lenses. It's incredibly sharp. It's a 1.4, so it takes in a ton of light. And it's one of my favorite to do any sort of environmental portraits with. I saw a question. Yeah. What's up?
At school, we're learning how to take photos with Canon,
Nice.
and we have our local photographer, Mike Drew.
Okay.
If you've heard of him.
Cool.
He takes a bunch of photos every week and makes an article about it,
That's awesome.
and then we like upload it to our computers and like use Pixlr.
Cool. Okay. I have. Yeah. So what do you like to photograph?
We haven't photographed in a while.
Okay.
Because, like, it's more winter.
Ah, okay. Yeah. It's a little cold. That's true.
I photograph
What's that? You photographed what?
a bench,
Okay.
tree,
Cool. That's awesome. What do you like about photographing that tree and that bench? Are there cool shadows? Are there cool colors? Cool shapes?
I like contrast.
Okay. You like really contrasty photos. Cool. All right. And you said you're shooting with a Canon camera? Yeah. Did you bring your camera with you?
No. It's like at school camera.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, there's lots of cameras in here you can play with, so we'll play with cameras after. That's for sure. Cool. Thank you. Cool. Okay. So, a couple of other lenses that I want to make sure that I mention. We're not going to go again down a huge rabbit hole when it comes to lenses, but a couple that I certainly want to mention. The 35 to 150 for our Sony. We now have it for Sony, Nikon, and Fuji setup. I personally shoot mostly Sony and Nikon, but the 35 to 150 quickly became a staple in my kit outside of me kind of leaving that realm of primes for a little while. 35 to 150 is a 2 to 2.8, lets in a ton of light. Yes, it is physically a little bit larger of a lens, but for the massive focal length that it encompasses all in one lens, does a really, really brilliant job. So I can take that to do a little bit of everything. Portraits, landscapes, any sort of street photography. I can even, compress my landscapes with that 150, so it has just a huge focal range to be able to work with. If you haven't given it a try, definitely suggest trying that one out.
It's a close-up camera today.
Oh, it is? Hi. That's awesome. I was live streaming with it last week too, actually. That's great. Paired with that, I like to pair it with the 20 to 40. So we have a 17 to 28 that I use a lot for my night skies, but it's slightly longer, like just slightly longer than the 20 to 40. So when I take out the 35 to 150, since that's a little bit physically larger of a lens, I'll usually pair that with the 20 to 40 so I can get something a little wider and it doesn't feel like I'm taking up any sort of extra space in my kit. So those two have kind of become a nice little like pair for me when I'm outside traveling. If I don't want to take a massive kit with me, it's a really good pairing. The 50 to 400. So the 50 to 400, I definitely want to mention, not just because of its huge focal range, but because it's actually a 1 to 2 macro. So it has a really great minimum focusing distance, which means that I can get in 1 to 2 on my, for any sort of close-up work that I want to do. So having that be kind of, you have a 50 to 400, you have such a massive range, and then on top of that, be able to get a 1 to 2 macro ratio, just kind of gives you a little bit of everything in that lens. And of course, the ones that really do a little bit of everything, your all-in-one lenses like the 28 to 200, the 18 to 400, those lenses are your kind of jack of all trades. They give you a little bit of everything when you're out there traveling so that you can not worry about switching out lenses and potentially getting sand and dust and everything inside of your sensor. You just have that one. If you're having trouble picking lenses and you're kind of looking for a kind of a nice way to start, jump on our website. There's a spot on there where you can select lenses per body system, so you don't have to go through the entire list of lenses that might not work for your specific kit. You can put in if you shoot for Sony, Nikon, Canon, whatever it is, and then choose from there. Yeah.
Hi,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, are there any travel journeys that you just traveled with one prime lens or fixed lens camera, and what was that prime lens or fixed lens camera that you used?
Awesome question. That would definitely be the 35. The 35-1.4 was something that I took with me everywhere. And if I was going to take, yes?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yep. The question was, has there been a place that I've gone lately, or travel that I've gone on lately, that I've taken just one camera, one lens, and that it has been a prime lens? And I said yes. So when I was shooting strictly primes, I was taking out that 35-1.4 all the time. And so I was taking out my Nikon setup with that 35-1.4, and that did nearly everything that I was trying to photograph. So thank you for that. It's a really great question, because it also pairs along with not just knowing our equipment, but knowing how we photograph and what I'm trying to photograph, right? So if I'm trying to go out that day and I'm shooting night skies, the 35, having it be a 1.4 is excellent, but it might not be wide enough for that particular shoot, right? So I need to know myself and how I photograph and what I'm trying to photograph. That's actually partially why lenses for a long time for me, the all-in-ones like the 18-400, I struggled with, because I would photograph that same thing at every single focal length. I'd photograph it at 18, at 50, at 100, at 400. I would just like overdo it. It was complete overkill with that one lens. So I went back to my prime roots and decided, okay, my primes, that's really where I want to be, because I can focus better. And that's just how my brain works. We're not robots, right? We all think differently. So having something where it kind of restructured the way I thought about my photography and made sure that I was kind of taking my time with it, that 35-1.4 really kind of got me back to that thinking space. So yeah, solid question. A couple of other pieces of equipment outside of the lens realm that might be really helpful specifically for our travel photography: filters. One of them being the circular polarizer. Circular polarizer is like putting sunglasses on your lens, right? Gives you a little bit of extra saturation, helps with the contrast quite a bit. It takes reflections off of non-metallic surfaces. It's really helpful for those kind of bright, sunny days that have those nice white puffy clouds in the sky to pull out a bit of that contrast. So circular polarizer I find really helpful because it also helps us tame down those highlights. Highlights are something that are really difficult to pull back on when you're editing later. If you blow out a spot in your image, trying to pull that back is really difficult. And we can't pull back from pixels that aren't there. So a polarizer is going to help us tame down those bright white highlights. The other is going to be a neutral density filter. Neutral density filter is a dark filter that helps us leave our shutter open for longer periods of time. So if I'm out on a really bright sunny day and I want to photograph this water, for example, I want to photograph a waterfall and I want to see that water kind of flow through my frame, I can't do that at noon on a bright sunny day and leave my shutter open for an entire second. While a second doesn't sound like a long period of time in our brains, it's a long period of time for an image, right? So letting a lot of light in over 1 second is going to completely overexpose my image. So having a neutral density filter where I can take away anywhere from 2 to 10 stops of light is going to change the way that I can be able to approach that scene. My only suggestion with, I'm not going to recommend brand or anything like that, but if you are looking for a neutral density filter and you're not doing them as singles, so one that takes away 2 stops, one filter that takes away 4, one that takes away 8, whatever that may be, if you're looking into a variable, just get one that has a stopper on the ends that doesn't completely over-rotate. Because the more we over-rotate, it almost kind of confuses the glass, and you'll end up with this deep blue X throughout the middle of your image. Because essentially it's like there's 2 circular polarizers on top of each other, right? So just get one that has a stopper on the end if you're looking for one that is a variable. Another piece of equipment, I don't consider this an accessory necessarily. I consider it more of a necessity because there are certain shoots, there are certain images that you cannot create without a tripod. My tripod is going to be my stability when I am working with long exposures. So if I'm out there trying to photograph the night sky, I don't care if you've never had a cup of coffee in your life, you cannot hand hold for 30 seconds and not expect shutter shake. That's just not how this works, right? So we need to make sure that we're stable for that amount of time. The other point of that is that it completely helps me control my composition. If I'm trying to photograph the thing that's over to there, but I decided to not take a tripod out with me, and the only place that I have a stable space for my camera is on the roof of my car's over there, that completely changes the fact that I can't photograph the thing over there right now. So I need to make sure that I'm in control of my composition, which we're going to talk about next. And tripod can be a really helpful thing for that. Tripod can really help me control that composition. Okay, so of course that led me into composition, right? We can take the most technically perfect image in the world. We can do all of the research that we just talked about. We can have all of the proper equipment. We can know our cameras inside and out. But if we don't attempt at trying more in our composition, if we don't focus on different unique pieces in our frame, there's not going to be really any oomph for our images, right? We want somebody to feel something when they see our images. And I don't mean just a happy or sad feeling. We want them to really go through our images and digest them differently. We want them to get a deeper understanding of these images. And one way of doing that is through our composition. And I kind of think of them as different puzzle pieces, right? I think of them as all of these unique puzzle pieces that help me piece together that one single image that's in there. First and foremost, I'm thinking about my focal point. My focal point is that very first spot in my image where my eye immediately goes to. That's the very, very first thing that I'm attracted to in an image. I can get there by light, I can get there by motion, I can get there by color, and get to that focal point in many, many different ways, but I want to make sure that I have one very specific focal point that my viewer can find immediately. One of the other ways to get to that focal point is by leading lines. Leading lines, there's no specific rule that says that I have to just have one leading line. I can have multiple. They can be made out of light, they can be made out of motion, they can be made, again, out of color. They're not just like the yellow brick road leading you through. There are all these different ways to get you to that focal point, and you can use these different leading lines to help guide you there. Again, these are guidelines, they're not specific rules, right? There aren't necessarily rules in photography as long as we're not hurting people or ourselves and other things. We're not hurting things. There aren't rules in photography. These are guidelines to help us create differently. One of these guidelines that I like to break all the time is thinking about our perspective, right? A lot of people will hate when I tell them this, but sometimes you have to lie on the ground to create the image that you're trying to create. Sometimes you literally have to climb a ladder. Sometimes you have to climb a mountain. Sometimes you have to move around to create the image that you're trying to create. You have to get that unique perspective and approach to try and show the people on the other side of your image what you see. You are the one photographing. You're the one in the scene, right? You smell the smells, you feel the feels. They don't. So we have to make sure that we can get them there by image. And one of the pieces of these puzzle pieces that I think is probably forgotten the most is scale. Since we were there, we were, again, in that scene, we know how big or how small those mountains were, right? When I'm standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, I know how deep that space is. The people who are looking at my image don't necessarily understand it like I do because I was there. So I'm trying to show them as best I can. And one of the ways to do that is via scale. If I keep something in that frame, whether it's a person or a ladybug when I'm photographing a flower or a car when I'm photographing in the street, all of these things, our brain naturally knows how to understand that measurement. So it helps us understand the measurement of the image a little bit more and of that space. So scale, I think, gets forgotten quite a bit, but it's something that when we are in these, beautiful national parks and we're out there photographing these wonderful spaces, I know that we want to be the only people that exist in the national park. It's never going to happen. But if we keep people in there sometimes, even though we might want to not have them in our frame, if you keep them in there in a certain way, it helps your viewer really understand the scale of that space. Color balance. So color balance is another kind of a piece to our composition that I recently added into this presentation because it adds an entirely different depth that I think we sometimes can get very overwhelmed by when we are in a scene that has so many active colors. If you can break down that scene into which colors are going to stand out more and which colors are going to recede, that's going to help us discover where our focal point is and discover where our actual focal point is instead of our intended focal point. We can have an intended focal point, but that might not shine through in that image. We might have an actual focal point that somebody sees first instead, and so we need to get them to that actual focal point. And sometimes we can do that via color. So like having this little kind of, this dark green bud over that bright yellow flower in the background, and then the relapse of that green in the background space, that changes the way that I layer this image, that I see the depth of that image. Versus if I just had that green bud over the green, it wouldn't have stood out as much, right? And that's kind of a very simple way to look at it, but it's a very necessary way to look at it. Yeah. Oh, we have a mic for you. Your turn.
Bird there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like if you put it against a brown, you just wouldn't have realized it.
It would blend in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to have those colors that kind of help the subject that we're photographing stand out. We want that to be the very first thing that we see in our picture. Exactly. Yeah. So the next example here that I'm going to show you is on 2 different slides, and it deals with the idea of controlling color later in post-process. Even though I see that color when I'm photographing the original image, I want to think about how I'm controlling that color later in post-process and knowing which colors are going to stand out and which colors are going to recede, right? So what I want to do first is start with making sure that my white balance is clean, that I don't have any really aggressive blue tones and cold tones, and I don't have any really dark warm tones or orange and red tones, that I have a very neutral, very clean white balance. Once I get there, I can start to control that image via color without having to really do much else, but I can pull out my focal point via color. So all I did was make sure that my white balance was clean, work with my greens and work with my oranges, and it pulled out the exact center point in this image that I really wanted. So if I go back, it was really flat here, right? We didn't really know where to look. We didn't exactly have that triangle for our focal point to find. But when I started to play around with color and deepen certain tones and highlight other tones, it controlled where my eye went. It controlled where my focal point was. And that's only with controlling color. I didn't crop anything extra. I didn't use any more contrast. I didn't pull out any highlights or anything. This was just with using color. And I can do that in programs like Lightroom, where I have that little kind of color box on the bottom. I can control each color in that image. So I know that thinking about all of this when we're behind a camera seems like a lot, right? This seems like a lot of different rules that we have to follow. And again, these aren't rules. These are just guidelines. These are kind of touch points for when we're behind our camera to think about what somebody is going to see in that picture later on, right? So while it sounds really overwhelming, all I'm doing is breaking that picture down into different grids. I'm breaking it down to see all of the reflections. I'm breaking it down to see how I'm framing my focal point. I'm breaking it down to see which colors are going to stand out and recede. And again, it sounds like a lot when we're behind the camera, but the more we use our equipment, the more we practice, the easier it's going to go. Just like a sport, right? The more we practice that sport, the easier that sport's going to become, the better we're going to get at it. Same thing when we're behind our camera. Okay, so I do want to get into more of the visual storytelling aspect of this part. So we've talked about a lot of the technical stuff. We've talked about the composition. This presentation encompasses a lot of different realms, but I want to talk about the visual storytelling aspect of all of this. So I put up the definition that you literally find in the dictionary so that we can all start there. We can all start from the same point. In photographic practice, visual storytelling is often called a photo essay or a photo story. It's a way for a photographer to narrate a story with a series of photographs. Captions are also an integral part of a photo story that should help the viewer understand each image. Okay, so what I want us to think about in these next slides is thinking about first what inspires us as photographers, as people, what inspires us. We went through that whole kind of beginning section of other photographers and how they inspire us and what we've learned from them. But think about what inspires you as a person. When you start to really focus on the things that inspire you, that brings in your photography. Then you can really focus on that. Sorry, just got really loud. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Everybody having a hard time focusing like me? Cool, great, awesome. Glad we're all on the same page. All right. All right, so back to visual storytelling. I want us to think about the things that really inspire us as humans and as individuals. That's going to help guide us in what inspires us in photography. I'm going to go through some of the things that inspire me when I'm on the road. And if you guys have things that inspire you that kind of have more recently come up, or things that you did quite a long time ago and now kind of wanted to resurface, let's talk about them, because there's lots of different things out there. I get inspired by going deeper into stories and spending more time with them. Spending more time with that person, place, or thing that I'm photographing brings out all of these different layers that I didn't originally know existed. And that comes with being flexible when I go out on the road. If I have a specific photograph that I'm trying to create, all of that research that I've done is amazing, but being flexible when I get there to know that I'm literally gonna learn something when I get there. I wanna make sure that I'm bringing that into these photographs, that I'm going to learn something and make sure that that is part of it. These two images were from Monument Valley on the Utah-Arizona border. We did a workshop there at the end of last year that was wonderful, and we worked with the Navajo Nation community to go a little bit deeper in our storytelling and have dinners with everybody so that they could teach us about their lives, so that we could learn about who they were and what they did on their everyday, just like what we do on our day-to-day. I wanted to learn about what they did in the morning, what they ate for breakfast, and where their family lives, if their family lives nearby, or if they left Navajo Nation. I wanted to learn a little bit more about them. And so spending time with this gentleman named Peter, once we got to the image just on the right is a place called Navajo Code Talker Point. Peter was one of the original Navajo code talkers, and so learning from him a little bit really kind of deepened my appreciation and understanding for the space that I was photographing, and gave me kind of a different light on what I could be spending my time with in the space that I was photographing. I also really get in, yes, go ahead, sorry.
Process when you're asking those, like without it becoming intrusive or invasive to a stranger ultimately?
Definitely. I'm going to actually go into a slide about that in just like 2 minutes. So yeah, hold that question and I'll come back to you. Another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about that inspires me when I'm out on the road is thinking about the space when I'm not there. The world keeps going when I'm not there. Just because I'm not in that specific space, it doesn't mean that the sun doesn't set there and the sun doesn't rise there. It still absolutely does. So I want to know what it's like when I'm not there. So I think a lot about the movement. I think a lot about if there is movement in that space, if there's water, if there's wildlife, what is moving around, and can I photograph the things that are moving, right? Can I photograph that space at the same time, at night, and during the day? And how is that going to be different? What is that going to represent differently? I like to think about it in different seasons. So just because, again, I'm not in that space at that same time does not mean that snow didn't happen, or doesn't mean that it's not 100 degrees, right? So I want to photograph it at different seasons so that I can get a different understanding of the space and know that it doesn't just have kind of one life to it. It has a really big life to it. Okay, next up, so I grabbed this quote from a Nat Geo magazine like over a decade ago, and it really, really stuck with me. So I keep it in most of my presentations so that I can kind of share it with everyone else, and you guys can get a good understanding of it. You don't have to read it word for word if you want. I'll read like the first 2 sentences since I know it's a little far back there. Landscapes come in all forms: mountains, forests, plains, deserts, swamps, etc. Each has its own characteristics, and individual sites within each category have their own too. The Grand Tetons do not look like the Andes, and the Nile River is different from the Mississippi. So what does that mean? Those are a lot of words, but can anybody tell me what that means? Or what that means to them? Told you I was going to pick on you, ask you questions. Yeah.
I think it's narrowing on to main characteristics that make that set or that scene unique to it. So kind of maybe putting some emphasis on that to draw out what makes that space special, I suppose.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Do you want to pass the mic over back? I think somebody else wanted to. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll just paraphrase what you just said.
Oh, cool. So we're all on the same page.
Which is each individual location has a particular sense of place, and one of at least my objectives is to capture that sense of place.
Definitely. Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Just so this particular space here, right? We have two bodies of water. We're on two particular oceans, but they are not the same. They have a very different life about them. And I want to make sure that when I am photographing them, I am photographing what I know and what I feel about that space so that I can portray that space properly, so that I can really give that space exactly what it's trying to tell instead of me trying to put a story onto it and create the narrative. I'm letting the narrative already be there, and I'm sharing that with what I can through my photography. So that kind of brings me to, I'm going to come back to your question in just a minute, to why we storytell. And so I put up here the few reasons as to why I figured out why I storytell. And this is different for everybody. These are not hard, set, and fast rules. These are things that you can come up with on your own. But these are things that have helped me progress in my storytelling and my understanding of it. And that'll bring me actually back to your question in just a minute too. So first, I storytell because it brings a topic to light. Whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, it brings a topic to light. It brings a topic to surface that maybe the person that I'm sharing that with didn't know before, right? So it really brings that story forward. It gives voices to those who haven't been heard. Okay, so I recently changed, well, a couple years ago now, I changed this statement around because a lot of times we hear the statement of giving voice to the voiceless. Has anybody heard that before? Yes, okay, so there was an interview, and a photographer friend of mine used to run a podcast called We Are Photographers through a company called Creative Live out of Washington. And one of the people that she interviewed was a gentleman named Patrick Brown. In that interview, they had talked about giving voices to the voiceless, and he very beautifully turned that around and said, I don't give a voice to the voiceless. Nothing is voiceless. They're just not being heard. And so we're just not listening properly. So a lot of times when we're not understanding, or when we're not when we're not translating something properly, it's because we're not hearing it properly. We're not giving it enough listen, right? And that could be just because it's not in the same language, right? That plant could be talking to me, and we're not speaking the same language, but I'm trying to understand its language, right? So we're not necessarily giving a voice to the voiceless. Everything has a voice. We just have to listen a little deeper sometimes. The third reason is because it creates connection, genuine human connection. Not just surface level connection, genuine human connection. When I have conversation, when I come up and hang out with Ted, I want to hear about his life. I want to talk to him. I want to learn about him, and I want to hear his stories, just like he wants to talk about me and hear my stories. That creates genuine human connection. This gentleman that I spent time with in the Pacific Northwest when I was running an event out there, I had gone out a couple days early to photograph the Peter Iredale shipwreck on the coast of Oregon, and I made sure I did all my research. I checked when the lowest tides were going to be. I checked when sunset was going to be. I checked when the night sky, when Milky Way was going to come up behind me on the horizon. Checked all of these things. But the one thing that I did not check is that when I got out there and I started photographing, as soon as the sun went down and it got dark and the tide was at its lowest, there were trucks that were literally driving up and down the beach, driving on the sand. And I had no idea what was going on. I'm on a beach photographing a shipwreck. I have no idea why there's trucks driving up and down the sand, right? So this guy stops and he says, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm photographing a shipwreck on the beach. What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, at night, after a certain period of time during these certain weeks, this literally becomes a highway for the fishermen. We're all out here clamming, so you should really be careful." I was like, oh, that's good. That's good to know. Thanks. And he was like, "I'll prove it." And so he went over to his truck and he pulled out this bag of clams that were in the back of his truck. and he drops them onto the sand, and he's like, "You want to photograph them?" So of course I do, absolutely I do. So we started talking from there, and then we ended up becoming good friends, and he helps us with some photo workshops out in the Pacific Northwest. So again, it creates genuine human connection, not just surface level connection. We deepen that a bit more, we learn a little bit more. So now I want to get into the how we photograph this way, right? So bringing this all the way back to your original question of how I start those relationships and how I deepen those relationships with people. I first kind of start with a maybe a common theme or a common question, something that we might have in common or something that I find interesting, right? If I want to photograph you, right? I might say, "I really love your hat." Right? I'm starting with something literally breaking, and I really love your hat, right? So I'm breaking down that barrier already where this person knows now I'm kind of a little bit more human, right? I'm not just somebody standing there with a camera. I've approached, I said, "I really like your hat." And we start down this conversation of, "Oh, that's cool. My aunt knitted it, and I've had it for 20 years, and it's really special to me," right? And so it just leads into more of that conversation. I'm either offering somebody a compliment or I'm finding something interesting, and I'm not just doing that to do it. I'm doing that because I actually mean it. Somebody can tell when you actually mean it, right? And so I usually start with that. And if somebody says no, so if our subject in particular, if we're photographing somebody, if we're photographing a person, and they say no and they don't want to be photographed, there's like 1 trillion people on the planet. That is okay. We can not make that photograph and we can move on to the next, right? We don't have to photograph every single time. It is okay to get turned down. It is okay to move on. Don't worry about that. But that's usually kind of how I start the process, is just being a person, right? And then, again, I think about the research, and we already talked about that, so we're not going to go super deep into that again. We had just kind of talked about the failure mentality, right? So if somebody I've approached doesn't want to be photographed, that is okay. I can move on. That's great. Have a good day. I hope you enjoy your cup of coffee, and maybe I'll see you next time I'm in town. That kind of thing, right? But that also comes to like the failure mentality when it comes to getting published or selling photographs or being hired for that wedding that we're trying to photograph, right? If that doesn't work out that time, that is okay. Still keep pushing for what you know you have achieved and what you know you can achieve. I was listening a while back to an interview with Amy Vitale, who's a brilliant photographer, wonderful photojournalist, has produced for Nat Geo. She's just a wonderful person. And she talked about one of the stories that she had tried to pitch like 3 or 4 times, and it just was not getting through. And finally, I think it was by like the 3rd or 4th time, she succeeded. And it's now one of the most prestigious, one of the most popular photo stories that has hit Nat Geo. So it's just like, we once we know that we have that beautiful story there, keep pushing. It's okay to fail at times. We haven't failed. Third on that is controlling composition, which again we've already gone in depth to, so we won't go too deep in there. Lighting. Photography exists because of light. So we talked a lot about color before and moving our focal point based on color, but we have to think about the lighting that is there too. Where is that immediate light source shining on? And making sure that is my subject, because if that is not my intended subject, that's going to be my actual subject when somebody looks at that picture, right? Right. And time. So I know that's a little dot there, but time. Time is incredibly important to whatever we're photographing. The more time we spend with it, the more we understand that, and the more somebody's going to understand our images. We spend time with it. So this particular image, it really kind of resonates with me when it comes to spending time with what we're photographing, and I wanted to bring it up as an example because I still, again, just like the other gentleman, Jerry, that I talked about earlier, this gentleman's name is Peter. He runs a cigar shop in Cayo in Florida, in Miami, and when I got there the first time, I got there to scout for a workshop, and there was a ton of people in his shop when I got there that day. So Calle Ocho is a really popular tourist street. It's really, really busy. So in his cigar shop, there's always tons of people in there. And of course, when I went in there at midday, there was just loads of people and everybody had cameras and everybody's asking questions and it's really loud. That's a beautiful thing. And I'm glad that his shop is that busy, right? But I knew that I wanted to make some photographs and I knew that I couldn't do it at that point. I knew that it was just going to be a little bit too overwhelming and I knew that I wanted to ask Peter some questions, but I didn't want to be just that other person with a camera. So I decided to leave the shop, say that I was going to go get a cup of coffee and come back in a little while, ask him if he wanted a cup of coffee, brought him a cup of coffee like an hour later, and the shop was a lot quieter at that point. At that point, we kind of start talking. He also was into photography, so he was asking me questions. At that point, I had actually put my camera away. Sometimes we forget that our camera can kind of be like, I don't want to say threatening, but it can kind of be threatening to a point where people know that you're trying to photograph them or that you're interested in what's going on, and it might kind of be a little off-putting. So I put my camera away, and now I'm just kind of more of a person. Now I'm just a conversation, somebody that they can talk to. And I start breaking down those barriers of asking him different questions, and he's asking me different questions. And at one point, he rolls up his sleeve, and I noticed that he had Hebrew written on the inside of his arm. I have family in Israel, my family's Israeli, and I've gone back and forth quite a few times to visit, and I don't speak a word of Hebrew. I speak like 3 words of Hebrew, so don't test me. But I at least recognize some of the letters, and so I asked him, I was like, why do you have Hebrew written on your arm? And he starts telling me about this place in the Middle East and specifically in Israel where the soil is really nice and he's going to be opening up a cigar shop there, and his face just like lit up. He was so excited to talk about it because this is where he, what he's been doing his entire life and how he wants to bring these, specific cigars around the world. So it really lit him up as a person, and it was beautiful to see how excited he was about that. And so by spending time with him in that way, I could photograph him a little bit differently. I could photograph him in a way that wasn't so intrusive and wasn't so automatic, and he spent a little bit more time with me. So that's what I mean by spending time, okay? All right, so I want to get into the idea of single image versus multiple image stories, right? Single images are powerful all in one image, and multiple image stories are kind of like a novel, right? We're reading them like a book. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We have characters, we have plot twists, we have all different things that are going on in there. And so those are our photo stories. Those are our kind of longer multi-image photo stories. Just like I talked about earlier, those single stories, we really want to focus on color depth and light and make sure that our viewer's eye bounces around the frame in the way that we want them to see those points first, right? So I want them to get a good understanding of this space and see the contrast between like clean and dirty, right? That's what I wanted to get out of this image. And by using that light source as a framing source of the main objects that are in my image, that really helped me create that dynamic in one image instead of having to do it in multiple, right? You can approach it in a couple of different ways. Again, there's not a perfect equation to any of it. But our multiple image stories, again, are like a book. We're reading them from beginning to middle to end. We're introducing characters. We're seeing different scenes. We're getting an understanding of that space, and we're learning a little bit deeper. So I'm going to show you about 10 images here throughout this story. This was shot back in 2019. Again, this is in Southern California, and I was out taking a workshop, actually, with Deanne Fitzmaurice at the Palm Springs Photo Festival. I take workshops, too, all the time. I'm always trying to be learning. I will never say that I'm perfect at anything. We're all still just trying to learn, right? So I took a workshop out there with Deanne Fitzmaurice in 2019, and the whole idea was to really spend time with our storytelling, really get deeper within our storytelling and understand how to format all of those images from beginning to middle to end. So I got out there a couple of days early because by the time the workshop started, I wanted to make sure that I had my subject chosen, right? We all had to have that starting point chosen by day one of the workshop. So I went out a couple of days early. And I met this guy who was the only volunteer firefighter of the town. And I talked with him about agreeing to be my subject for a few days and basically letting me invade his life for like 3 days. It's really nice of them to do, right? But I get there on start day, and he is literally nowhere to be found. I am devastated. Like, I have no idea how this is gonna work. I refuse to fail in front of like a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner. I'm absolutely not failing, so I'm gonna figure this out. So I grabbed my breakfast, it's like 6 in the morning, and I'm just like driving up and down these side streets, and the town is really, really small. At the time that I was there was really only like 250 people in the town. So no one was up at 6 in the morning. Everyone was assumingly sleeping or just not where I was. So I kind of stopped, had my breakfast, continued to drive around a little bit, and just learn the town a little bit more. Partway through the morning, I find these 2 guys that are playing football in the middle of the street. So I decided, all right, Erica, you can literally talk to anybody. Just stop, get out, talk to them, see if anyone's interested in photography, and if somebody might be interested in letting you photograph them for a couple of days, and just see how it goes. So back to that kind of first image though, now you get, like the very first image in this story, you get a sense of place, right? You get an understanding of a little bit more of that space. You see that it's, kind of get a good understanding of the time of day, that it's very dry and arid. And you even kind of get a title in here, right? This is Bombay Beach. This is at the Salton Sea in Southern California. So again, I kind of stop the car, get out, meet these guys, and for photo story purposes, now you can see that I'm bringing in characters into this story. I'm introducing people. We don't know them yet. We don't know anything about them, but we know they exist in some capacity in the story, right? So I get out and I start talking to these guys. The guy in the front in the pink shirt, his name is Jack. He is literally a jack of all trades, and I get out and I tell him a little bit about me and my story and what I'm doing there. I said, hey, would you be interested? Is it okay if I photograph you for a couple of days? He says, hell yeah, let's go, absolutely. I'm like, oh, thank God, this is gonna be great. Problem solved, whew. All right, so again, his name is Jack. He's literally like the jack of all trades of the town. He is the electrician, he's the plumber, carpenter, he does a little bit of everything. He's a super, super nice guy. So again, for storytelling purposes, I've involved a little bit of who he is, but I hadn't yet brought in his face. We don't really know, we don't have a face to put with this story, right? So now, partway through the story, I can add him in. And adding him in really gives me another dimension, right? I now have a little bit more of a personal relationship with who this person is. So my first 4 images, I'm starting with a sense of place, I'm introducing a character, I'm getting to know a little bit about who that character is, and then I'm introducing them as a person. I'm getting to know them a little bit more and a little bit on a deeper level. So partway through our shoot, that very first day, Jack says to me, hey, I'm starving, I'm gonna go home and get some lunch. Do you want to come and meet my wife, Steffi? Now, I am not condoning going places with strangers. I'm not condoning getting into cars with strangers ever. I'm not. Use your spidey senses and do things respectfully and properly. But at this point, him and I had developed a pretty good relationship, and I had my own car, and I have other ways to protect myself, and people know where I am, so I was safe in this particular space. Make sure you are always safe. So I go back and I meet his wife, Steffi. Steffi, again, for photo story purposes, I add her into this story, but in a way that we know she exists, but not in what capacity yet, right? So we know that they have a relationship. We don't know what their relationship is, but we now have brought her into the story. So one sec. So we bring her into the story. Steffi used to be a model, right? So when I asked her to make a portrait, she was all over it. She was all about it, and she had this awesome hat on. She had a great pink shirt, and there was coincidentally this like really light pink painted, what's it called, like storage unit next to it. So it was perfect. She just stood right in front of this, had some really beautiful light. So I made this great portrait of Steffi. So now I've brought her in as a character, right? But we still don't know what their relationship is, right? We don't know how they're connected. So I want to make sure that I bring in some detail here. I want to make sure that the people who are viewing this story understand their relationship a little bit more. So this little detail here is of his ring finger. He has Steffi tattooed on his ring finger. So we now know that they are married, that this is their relationship, what their connection is, right? And I want to bring these details in there, not just for that purpose, but so that, again, I can get to know them on a deeper level, so that I can be sharing their narrative and what they have to say. I'm not putting any sort of narrative on them. They are telling me what they want to share. Just by having conversation, just by interacting, they're sharing exactly what they want to be told, no more, no less. So I also want to make sure that I'm bringing in their space. They're incredibly colorful, flamboyant people with all of this really excited energy about them, right? So I bring in their space. You can see Steffi sitting in the back there on her phone, so it gives us a little bit of a sense of scale. And it gives us a more understanding of what kind of Bombay Beach at the Salton Sea is like, and how eclectic it is, and how unique it is. So partway through this photo shoot, Steffi and Jack had shared with me that they had moved to Bombay Beach only a couple of years past, because they had gotten really deeply involved in drugs in LA, and they didn't want to live that life anymore. And they knew that they had to get out of it, and they knew that by staying in LA, they wouldn't be able to do that. They couldn't escape the same family and friends that they had. They couldn't make the changes that they wanted to make. So they moved out to Bombay Beach. And this kind of tree that you see on the right here, the blue painted tree, that's kind of their, Jack called it his spirit tree, his Bible tree, right? So this was his space where he came every day to sit for a few minutes and just have an experience, just know that he left his past life and he was moving on to this future life in a way that he saw fit for himself and his wife. So before our session ended, I wanted to make sure that I could give back to them in some way, especially when we're photographing people, when we're photographing anything, but I really always want to make sure that I am leaving a good impression, that I am leaving a good footprint, that I am not constantly taking, that I am also giving back, because photography it's a two-way street, right? There are cameras and everything now. We have cell phones with us everywhere. So we want to be a good steward of photography and make sure that maybe the next time when somebody comes up and asks for a photograph, somebody's not going to be so afraid to say yes, or not be afraid as to where their photos are going because the person that photographed them previously was a good steward of photography, right? So I want to make sure that I'm always not just capable of that, but I'm actually implementing that in what I'm doing. And so I wanted to make sure that I could give them a photograph back. I noticed that in their place, they didn't have any prints. They didn't have anything of themselves or their family or anything on the wall. So I asked them if they'd sit for a portrait, so that I could make that and be able to send that back to them. And right when they sat down, before I made their original portrait, this was their look. And they looked at each other with such a beautiful sense of awe and love that this story went from me just photographing Jack the plumber and following him around for a couple of days to this beautiful story of love and commitment and their change in each other and themselves and space, and how they kind of moved on to this new space in their lives. So this story completely changed from the time I got there to the time it ended. So doing all of that research, as I said, is wonderful, and we want to do all those things, but be flexible with as these stories come to you. Make sure that again, you're being a good steward of photography, and that you're moving forward the narrative that person, place, or thing has to share with you and has to share with the world, and to make sure that it gets out there, right? And to be unique with the way that you approach your stories, because again, we are not robots. We are individual brains, and what works for one person doesn't work for the next, right? So if I want to go out there and photograph macro, which, as I admitted to all of you earlier, I'm not much of a macro photographer, I'm going to approach it in a way that I understand, in a way that works for my brain. So I'm going to look at macro like little portraits, right? Where I have these little portraits of different stages of this flower. I'm approaching whatever I'm approaching in a way that I understand, in a way that can better me and that can better everybody else. So I know that was a lot of information in like an hour and 15 minutes. It was a lot of noise, so thank you. But if you have questions, I definitely want to stick around for those. Yes.
I just want to know about what are your thank you. Yeah, what are your thoughts about the computational photography? That's like using AI, your mobile devices. Nowadays, like it's become more smarter, and you can take a lot of pictures with that.
Just with using a phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best camera that you have, honestly, is the one that you have on you, right? If I've left my camera at home and all I have is my phone, then I'm gonna make pictures with my phone as best I can, absolutely. AI is kind of a deep rabbit hole to get into, so I won't go too deep into AI necessarily. I think that if we can use all of this new technology to learn and grow from it and to be better, sure. But I think that there's also a space where we can use it in a harmful way, and I'm not about to go down that route. I don't want to be changing my images to a point where they're not I don't want to say fake, but they're not genuine. Yeah, they're not genuine. They're not realistic, right? That I want people to be able to see the true narrative that are in my images and not be implementing things that don't exist, right? If I'm writing a fiction novel, sure, but I'm showing real images of the world, so I don't want to create something that isn't there. But yeah, of course, yeah.
So when you're going on your visual storytelling shoots, I'm just wondering, how do you decide in that moment, when you're taking these photos and you're stitching together this story, what photos to keep? Are you looking through your camera right after you take the shot and you're chimping and you're saying, I want to keep that? Or, are you looking at it after the fact? So I just want to know.
That's a really great question. And if I'm being honest, it's different every time. I can implement as much of a system as I want, but it is a little bit different every time. So I definitely have an idea of what I would like that story to be going into it, and what I would like to show going into it. So I go in with the mindset of, if I am photographing, I don't know, let's say I'm going to photograph, I don't know, anything, whatever. But if I'm going to photograph a camping trip, right? I want to make sure that I am photographing the people around me and the little details of the landscape. I want to show the grand landscape. I want to show the struggle that it took to get there. I want to show the finish line. I want to show when we all get back together and we're all sweaty and nasty and disgusting. Like, I want to make sure I show those things, right? But if I am personally on this camping trip and I get there and we partway through come across a lake that we're fishing in, and we end up fishing in this lake and catch a fish that is really uncommon to catch, right? Maybe my story now diverts to that, and that's where my brain goes, right? So then I'm taking these images home and I'm culling through them and I'm seeing that really that's what the story is, that it actually wasn't about the camping trip at all, that it was about finding this native fish that none of us knew existed, and how excited my buddy Tony was to actually catch that fish and release that fish, all of those things. Maybe that's what it comes down to. So I'm flexible enough to know that my story may shift, but a lot of times I'm bringing these images home, and then that's where my story comes together. So it is very dependent on what that is, and it's also dependent on if I'm shooting for a publication, if I'm shooting with an editor in mind, and they have something that they want. A lot of times that's not in my control. They get the images after, and I'm doing my best to create what they want out of that narrative and what they see in that narrative to tell the story that's there. But they're choosing what images actually go into that publication and where the story goes. Yeah. Yeah.
The story can come after the fact that you take these photos, and of course that narrative can change.
Yeah.
It's being flexible and adaptable to that.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to throw a couple questions just from our live stream audience, and then
Yeah.
we'll cut the stream off, and then we can open up more to you guys.
Cool.
So we have one here from Vineet Gill. Do you ever pay people to photograph them?
Do I pay people to photograph them?
I guess while you're traveling.
No, I mean, if it's for like a studio shoot, if I've hired a model or something, sure. Yeah, if I've hired somebody for that shoot, yes. I can't say that I necessarily pay people when I'm out just doing street photography, no. But it depends on the relationship that we develop later on, right? So one of the people that I showed in the shoot earlier, he ended up working with us for a few other workshops, so I would pay him to come out to work for the workshops because he's working, right? So he's there to be a model for our photo shoots and to teach us a little bit about him and the space and what we're doing. So yeah, so I'll pay them in that sense, yeah.
Okay, one more from the stream here from Anita. I tend to be the type of person to just take one type of photo. Is that detrimental as a photographer to not be genre specific? To me, travel is all but curious. What are your thoughts are?
Say the beginning one more time.
To me, the beginning?
Yeah.
I tend to be the kind of person to take one type of photo. Is that
Okay.
detrimental as a photographer to not be genre specific?
No, I think that you are the artist. You are creating. Yeah, you are the artist. You get to make your own rules for how you photograph and how you see the world and what you're trying to produce. I don't think that, again, there's no rules as long as you are not hurting anyone else or anything else or yourself. I think that all things go.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, to our live stream audience at home, thanks so much for joining us. If you want to check out more of Erica's work, hopefully the TCS TV live Dream team can put that on the screen there so you can see where to find her on the socials. But we thank again Tamara and Canada for sponsoring this event. We all had a very good time. Erica is a wonderful presenter. I'll show you all the comments afterwards.
thanks.
But yeah, we'll catch all of our live stream viewers again very soon. Thanks.